My topic today is about censorship. So, here comes my topic of news today. It's an editorial on the Buffalo News. It's about editorial judgment is not censorship. Alright, so actually, the time that published was on 1991. It's very long ago, but it's more like an educational or it would say a clarification about news editorial on censorship and responsible journalism. So I think it's worth reading even when it took a lot of time back there. Alright. So that's about the summary part. So let's analyze the 5 WHS and 1 how. So about what is about censorship is taken as a negative now. So actually, in the first paragraph, we are taught that most Americans would agree that the word censorship has a negative connotation. On the other hand, responsible journalistic practices likely would draw positive reactions from the majority. Right. So actually, to Americans, because that is a country that extols the freedom to the top priority. So to them, everyone who picks up the information or the messages from the original text was about censorship. Alright, so they sort of to misuse or abuse so-called freedom. So this passage, this editorial, is actually from the press to standing back for them to help people to know what they're doing is helping the audience to know what is important, what is the essence of the message, rather than censored what message should be sent out. Okay, so who is about by the Americans, and when is on 1991 on November 19th, and where is in the USA. Why is that it disobeys the spirit of freedom that American extols for, and how is that it raises a series of examples to explain the differences between the two. Right. So about the debates, actually, there are some, clarification about that. So first one is about that. Actually, the press is about journalistic practices. So you could see some quotes here, like, our best reporters who cover City Hall, Country Hall, police, or whatever are daily making fundamental decisions on what stories that will write and which ones they do not feel are important enough to write about. They're exercising responsible journalism in this selection process, but those who disagree with their choices could say they are censoring the news. So, on the other hand, we sort of see that the press is trying to telling others that actually there are tons of messages flew in today and happens in one day. So the press is doing is they help to choose the important message for the audience rather than censored the contents. Okay, so it continues like that. Like among those who have raised the censorship issue is a Buffalo State College media study professor, whose letter was published Monday in Everybody's column. I'm outraged and disgusted, he wrote, adding to his students are learning first-hand the lesson of media monopoly. So actually it accused of the press of the media monopoly on the messages and informations here. Okay, so another one is about the political satire. Okay, talk about political satire here. So why do you mention political satire is that in the stripes or in some comics we sort of see that there are some politically implied satire on the government or the deeds that have done. So people try to write or try to draw that kind of works, try to use as a message to tell the press or try to tell the world or try to tell the audience that some of them might not that obey or agree with the status quo or the authorities concern. So it raised a debate that whether we have to forbid this kind of political satire, because from the government's view that if you didn't ban political satire, that would be the mess in the world or in the country. But from the audience perspective, or we say from the people's perspective, those political satire are actually the exertion of the freedom itself. It tries to differentiate between how the government should censor, or should they leave that to let the freedom goes upon. Okay, so here are also some quotes here about the last professor concluded his letter with the lofty flourish. As the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern European countries fight to win freedom of the press and continue their fight against censorship, the citizens of Buffalo and Western New York are denied such freedom. So it actually tried to fight back that why should the government ban the political satire? That is the freedom they fight for centuries and centuries. Why should we like Soviet Union or China or Eastern European countries that forbid humans freedom on uttering every word they like? Okay. Right. So here comes the omitted part. So actually here I sort of say that is a very educational, or sort of say very informative editorial on the clarification on the two ideas that people might mess up, or we say from different perspective to see this phenomenon. But there are also something that is omitted. So for the first one is that it did not provide first-hand critiques that people made on the censorship. So it keeps pointing out that people said what they are doing is about censorship, but it didn't provide the first-hand message about that. So the audience has no idea about the claim they made. So we might be led by their comments rather than seeing the first-hand critiques and do some contemplation. Alright. So the second omitted one is about most of the claims are from the perspective of the press. We can sort of see, we can barely to see the voice or the messages from the other side, which means that we have no idea what the opposites are just thinking about. Alright. So the third one is that though it did mention between the differences between the censorship and responsible journalistic practices, but it did not provide what methods could people apply to differentiate the two. So actually in this passage we could just see the examples or the points that the press raised to fight back, rather than the theory or the criteria that they apply on how to differentiate between the two. So I will say without this part, this passage or this editorial might become just a fighting back message rather than an educational one. Alright. So I think if it involves such criteria in between his passage, this passage will have more values on teaching people how to differentiate. Okay. So here comes the last part, is some analysis. So actually, we sort of see that the subject matters and the perspectives. So what is subject matters? So subject matter is about the contents of the news. So we can see subject matters in political satire and we sort of say libel. Okay, so it depends how we see this content. So it's about perspective. So from this news, or we say from this phenomenon, from this topic, I sort of learned that everyone or everything that we try to see, based on different perspectives, the subject matters might change. Okay, so if you from the people's perspective, you sort of say that, wow, political satire, that is actually the output of people's freedom. But if you're from the government's perspective, you will say, wow, that is a libel, that is a negative, comments on us on how we did. So I sort of see that actually that is very subjective. Everything that you make comments, everything that you be attached to, depends on how you see that. Okay, so this is about the first thing that I've learned, and after that I have interviewed two of my roommates about censorship. So for my first roommate, it tells me about that. Okay, about censorship. he think is needed. It's like a preliminary censorship. So it thinks that it try to, we have to use censorship based on the preface on we should not harm others' right. And the second one is that we should not cause others inconvenience. That is to say, censorship is used for people to help, to protect people from knowing others' inconvenience or others, uncomfortableness. Okay, and my second interviewer, or we say the second rumors, it talk about it's like a protection snare. You have to, it's also like a protection, but it has to involve the citizenship rather than merely the government to censor this message. Okay, because it states that censorship is like a filter. It prevents the following incidents. If someone start one negative comments on the first hand, and there will be tons of incidents that link together happening. All right, so it's like a protection snare. But who to censor is the problem, right? So it told me that you have to involve part of the government and part of the citizenship. Try to mingle and try to strike a balance between. Okay, so I think that is the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.